Welcome to Pineland Underground, the official podcast of the United States Army's John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, and the best podcast the military has to offer.
Real, bold, and unrestricted.
We're your hosts, Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter,
Major Bobby Tuttle. Welcome to Pineland Underground.
Welcome back to Pineland Underground. Today's episode takes us through a story about special operations in a real-world, unforeseen crisis situation. Sometimes special operations find themselves in foreign countries conducting one mission, and then suddenly they find themselves being retasked to quickly respond to a crisis situation where they are the only entities capable of intervening and making a difference. Bobby, over to you.
Yeah, so happy to have two great friends, two teammates, and two fantastic individuals coming from 1st Special Forces Group, Mitch Elwood and Dan Kurtenbach. Gents, welcome to Pineland Underground.
Thanks for the invite, Bobby.
Excited to be here.
Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
Absolutely. To just recap and do a little background on our guest today. So Sergeant Major retired Mitch Elwood, a longtime member of 1st Special Forces Group with 25 years of active service. He stomped ground and broke bread in over 35 countries during that time and conducted combat operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the southern Philippines. He served on Detachment 153 or 1223 as a medical sergeant and Detachment 1121 as a team sergeant. All of these were mountain teams. Mitch is a disaster magnet, a self-proclaimed disaster magnet, as you'll find out here today. He's found himself in the Philippines during Typhoon Yolanda back in 2013, right on the ground in Nepal for the 7.8 earthquake in 2015 that we're digging into tonight, and he responded to Indonesia for the tsunami event in Sulawesi in 2018. Mitch, welcome to Pineland Underground, man.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro.
Hell yeah. All right. And we got Dan Kurtenbach, another good friend, teammate, and colleague. Dan's a former Army Special Forces and infantry officer with special operations and conventional assignments in the Middle East, Europe, and across Asia. Most notably, he led an infantry platoon in Iraq, and then he commanded the Special Forces A-Team responsible for conducting these rescue operations that we're going to dive into tonight in 2015 during the Nepal Earthquake. He also subsequently led a special operations element in the U.S. Embassy in Bangladesh during the 2016 Dhaka terrorist attacks. Dan is currently the director at a machine learning company, and he's also a doctoral candidate at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Previously, he was also a White House Fellow from 2020 to 2021 and a program manager for a new product introduction at Apple in Silicon Valley. So, Dan, welcome on the show, man.
Thanks, Bobby. Good to see you. Nice to meet you, Chuck. And let me say that Mitch's bios always sound more exciting than mine. It's good to have him as a team sergeant.
Love this.
If only I was as smart as you, we'd be ruling the world, like Pinky and the Brain, kind of stuff.
Hey, so to kick this off, hey, Mitch, kind of over to you. Can you help us paint the picture real quick of the day in 2015 where you guys found yourself?
Okay, so we were at the airport when this hit. We were there for a JSET, a Joint Combined Exercise Training event. A lot of Green Berets do. And First Group, we do these a lot throughout Asia. We found ourselves in Nepal we were planning on working with the Mahabir Rangers to do high-altitude rescue training. It was a two-team mission. 1126, a Halo team, was also there. They were going to be doing counterterrorism, shooting POI, those types of things. And they were flying in on a C-130, and we were right next to the tarmac. I remember there's this little Buddhist temple there, and there's some buildings on the sides of us that were, kind of airport hangar buildings. We're in this little grassy strip, sitting in this little bus, get with all our crap, getting ready to offload, the other team as they arrived. And next thing we know, it's like, smack! There was a forklift driver behind us, and everybody on the bus, at least I did, thought that the forklift driver had rammed us. Oh. We're all like, what the hell, man? Who taught this forklift driver how to drive? And then the shaking continued. Look back, the forklift driver is nowhere near us. We look out the windows, and we see the buildings, like, swaying. And, we hear, glass cracking. All at once, everybody's yelling, earthquake, it's like, and then the doors of this little bus swing open, and it was almost like we were exiting out a burning aircraft, that was like emergency jump procedures. We're all like, go, go, go. We're like running out of this little bus and trying to get to an open area because the buildings around us look super sketchy. So we go, we run out of the bus, we get by this little shrine, and we're watching the shrine kind of shake, and everything is kind of rattling around us. We look off in the distance of Kathmandu, which was kind of down below where the aircraft was, and we see like dust clouds coming up, boof, 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 from all the buildings crumbling. And it was a very significant earthquake. And with Nepal's infrastructure, this thing had been foretold for a long time. But this was the moment when it hit, and there's a lot of damage. So the team, I'll let Dan talk about the C-130 arriving and receiving the next ODA.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. To his point, like we had already been in country for about 3 weeks. We had pitched and got approved doing the Everest Base Camp trek as part of our high altitude training that I think we'll dig into a little bit later. But this was the second detachment, 1126, which was a Halo team. They were landing in their C-130 with all of their gear and a lot of hours as that main shock from the earthquake hit. So when they landed, their assumption was they had blown a tire or something because they were landing on an active earthquake on the landing strip there in Kathmandu.
Yeah, I remember we ran to the back of that thing. So on the side of the tarmac, these airplanes their wings were kind of like dipping left and right from the earth undulating around us. So the wings on the side of these stationary aircraft were just doing this as the C-130 came down. So the ramp drops. The team's out there. They're like looking at us like, what the hell just happened? We're like, dudes, you just landed in an earthquake and not like a baby earthquake. And they're like, man, we thought, like Dan said, we thought we popped a tire or something. We thought we were going to wreck. And so the pilot shows up. I remember we were like, who's the pilot? And we need to shake this guy's hand. You need to get some kind of commendation or some kind of badge, because military loves badges and cool swag. You need like an earthquake commendation like lapel, So he designated probably one of the only people that I've ever, in the history of the Air Force that has landed in an earthquake that big like that.
So what I recall reading was this was a 7.8 magnitude earthquake. I mean, the damage was insurmountable, and obviously it took weeks and months to even kind of understand the level of catastrophic effect. Upwards of 20,000 civilians, or 20,000 Nepalese people perished in this earthquake, and the time afterwards, and just trillions of dollars worth of damage as well, just completely destroyed the area.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll let Dan talk a little bit about how we kind of at that moment, it's kind of like you're just processing information. In our brains, we're thinking about what's next in the grand scheme of our op going there. But the moment that's like this is going on, it's like that thought as your head is like, okay, things have changed. We don't know the depth of this, but we know it's significant. And no comms are working, cell phones aren't working, internet's not working. It's a blackout with information. So that was when we started to have to try to figure out what was next. I'll let you go down and talk about
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mitch. And so to the point there, we don't know how bad it is, but based on all the things that Mitch described and the dust clouds, because Nepal is not, especially even in Kathmandu, the capital, a super developed country. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have like earthquake proof buildings. So we knew it was going to be bad. We didn't know how bad. So our first thought was we need to get to the embassy, because if there's a place where people are making decisions and we can be like used in some capacity or give ourselves some sort of mandate, it's going to be from there. That's where we're going to have access to communications and be able to, interface with the State Department and other agencies on the ground. So that was our first and primary directive as soon as we got most of the things off of the plane that we needed after receiving 1126.
Yeah. And by the way, this comes later on, but we had all kinds of ammunition and stuff like that. So it's not exactly an HADR package.
So you guys were coming in to work with your Nepalese partner forces to do shoot, moving, communicating, medicating, sustaining, things to, for a JSET type event. But immediately the things that you have may not be used in that immediate capacity. So pallets of ammunition, is that right, Mitch?
Yeah, it was a very shooting heavy POI for the other team. And so what some people might have hoped that a U.S., it was happening at the moment, but if they see a U.S. C-130 on the tarmac, it's not a good optic to be unloading bullets as opposed to snacks. You know what I mean? So that was one of the things that we were kind of cautious about. Yeah, we're like, wow, we need to be careful with this and how it looks,
And you guys said you were trying to cover that up, right? All the ammo?
We totally covered it up. Yeah, we tarped it, hid it away. Nobody was the wiser because we were aware that could have probably been a bad message.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Bad optic as humanitarian assistance and disaster relief stuff is flowing in. All of a sudden, you got U.S. military plane with ammunition coming at the exact same time with soft guys.
Yeah.
Just bad timing, right?
Yeah, Mitch, we're jumping into the kind of like actually the middle of the story because the middle of the story was built up to by a number of different events for the team. And I think it bears mentioning kind of like the catalyst that required us to be in Nepal in the first place, right? The call that we got while we were as a team in Thailand, and some of the things that we had done before that that led us to this point. Bobby, Chuck, is that something you want to talk about now, or do you want to do it later?
Before we get into that, let's fast forward a little bit to the point. From what I understand is you guys were at the embassy. They were poorly equipped to do anything with responding to this, and you guys just started hustling and bustling to make things happen.
Yeah, so when we finally got to the embassy, at this point, a lot of the infrastructure has crumbled in town. And so this is trekking season, right? This is a point when it's the busiest in Nepal. It happens twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, when all the climbers and trekkers come to do the cool stuff in the Himalayas. Beautiful country. There's three religions that a Nepalese person will tell you. They have Buddhism, Hinduism, and they have tourism. It's like a religion, and they take it very serious. So it's been a significant blow to that. So now all these trekkers and hikers and whoever's in town that's American is heading to the U.S. Embassy for assistance. So the embassy, it's a beautiful embassy. It's got a nice courtyard around it, but it's not super massive. So we've got, I don't know what the count was, with a number of trekkers and hikers and hippies and whatnot, people trying to, people who love their nature and go there to get their chi straightened and whatever else and, listen to singing bowls. They're rolling in, and they are like setting up camp around there. Very quickly, the entire embassy ground smells of cannabis. and
Nice.
and our team is like, okay, well, let's help out, right? We're healthy. We can help out. We're not. We don't have the same issues that the U.S. Embassy personnel do, because they lived there for years. They have family there. Remember, the security personnel are hired from the local people, so they are very quickly focused on the safety of their families, the safety of their villages that they came from, if they're a local national. And so there's like kind of an absence of embassy personnel. It's kind of quiet, but you have this huge amount of influx of people that are starting to flow through the gates looking for shelter and refuge. And so we were doing the best we could to help out the State Department folks there, set up cots, set up tents. We actually set up all the cots and all the tents, and we didn't have any of our own gear because it was still back at the Radisson Hotel. So we found ourselves emptying the boxes to help everybody else, and then we're like looking around at each other like, hey man, did you set aside any cots for you? And I was like, and he was like, no. I remember like me and Josh, the warrant officer, he's like, you didn't get a cot either? I was like, no. So all we had was the boxes left in the cots. So like me and the warrant officer were like, well, I got a box. So we looked like a bunch of hobos. We took these boxes and like me and Josh were sleeping under the stairs in the main lobby in these boxes. I don't know. Where did you end up? I can't remember where you were in the hallway, right?
No one found a spot for me. So by the time I finally fell asleep at like 3 a.m., I was underneath a desk in one of the offices.
That's right.
It was great.
Right.
That was one.
Yeah. So the medics were in the hallway near the nursing station because the nurse was gone. She was, caught up in all the issues. So they were sleeping in the hallways. They were starting to treat people. Commo guys were starting to set up comms. Security, our Bravos, obviously, our security guys, they were linking up with the RSO, and they were starting to augment security of the embassy. So we were pretty much like, we set up kind of our own ops end. We set up our own kind of like, what do? You're trying to figure stuff out. Some of the package that came in with the team was enablers. One of our enablers was a cook. He actually went into the chow hall. You have all these people coming in. They're asking for food. They got any water? Well, all the cook staff were local nationals. They are nowhere to be seen. They've left to go check on their families. And so now you've got a lot of mouths to feed, and so naturally our Army cook, he just got to work, started whipping up chow, and was feeding hundreds of people a day. He did a great job.
Holy smokes. So you guys immediately showed your value to the Department of State of what you could do by kind of organizing at the U.S. Embassy and just providing assistance in life support type things like food, like meals, like beds and cots, and I imagine information as well.
Yeah. No, you're right, Bobby. There's like three things, and Mitch hit on two of them. First was setting up the medical station. The second one was going to work and getting food to the people who needed it, because anybody with a U.S. passport in the area was encouraged to come into the building. The third thing was that the regional security officer and his team didn't have enough people to both provide security for the embassy, but then they had a mandate to bring all of the American kids from the schools and the families who had no way to get from the schools to the embassy there. And so we actually just took a number of the embassy's vehicles with their permission, with communications, and went to the locations, picked up the people, and brought them back.
That was a big win in the beginning because we showed our worth. We went and got their kids, right? They were worried about them. And you got to remember, these roads, bridges were out, roads were crumbling, there's buildings in roads. So we were kind of lights and sirens off-roading it a little bit through Kathmandu to get these kiddos back to the embassy and back to their families.
I'm picturing like an apocalyptic type scene here. I've seen the photos from our Special Warfare magazine and from some of your guys' other articles and after action reviews, but just apocalyptic, right? Rubble, destruction, chaos, confusion. Are those like kind of the right words we're describing here?
Correct. The biggest thing though is command and control, right? So we get so accustomed to be able to talk to anybody. And if you're somebody controlling people, it's very easy to just pick up a phone, call them. That didn't exist. We were pretty much the only game in town for the whole country that had comms. We had very robust comms. And so we cracked it out. We had satellite communication, very robust satellite communication package. And so that started to help itself when we started to do this work.
Was that your team internal communication kit, or are you talking about with the embassy?
So we didn't need the embassy's kit. They did have SATCOM, but that's very limited. It's not super mobilized. So we were able to use Thuraya sat sleeves. Yep. We had the Iridiums from the team. We had team SATCOM plus. We had some experimental stuff like the Thuraya, IP Wi-Fi thing that was connected to a satellite. We had a lot of SAT. Yeah.
What did you guys do first, and what was that discussion like amongst the two of you as a detachment command team, and then your sister detachment as well? What did you guys talk about of what do we do now, and then how did you task organize to go do those things?
So Mitch, talk really quickly about the three folks that we had in Pokhara.
Yeah. So at this time, we've already started to position people for our JSET. Our JSET was going to be up to altitudes of 16,500 feet. So that was one of the reasons why we had been in country so long, was to acclimate to altitude. So we had personnel in Pokhara. It's the stopover in order to get long drive from Pokhara. You could fly to Pokhara, which is a trekking kind of mecca area outside of Kathmandu. And then Jamsam is where we're going to end up. So we had personnel already in an area that had been hit too. So we were able to provide feedback immediately about what was happening in the hinterlands. One of those places being Pokhara to the embassy. We already had people staged there.
Hey, real quick, can you explain JSET for listeners that might not know what that means?
Yeah, JSET is a Joint Combined Exchange Training. It's what Green Berets do with foreign countries of a similar type of military. It could be special ops unit, different tiers, but sometimes we do it with Secret Service level people if a special ops unit isn't available. It allows us to get a lot of good training, which our bread and butter is working with local nationals, the indigenous approach. And the only way to really be good at that is to work with indigenous folks from different countries. And so a JSET allows us to do that while honing our skills from shoot, move, communicate, a lot of the soft missions, special forces missions, but it also allows that host nation unit to also get training. A lot of the funding is on us because most of the time we're the ones traveling. We like to make sure we get the most training for the buck. We try to pick the right place, but occasionally a unit in a country will ask us for a specific type of training. And that was what happened here in Nepal. It made sense for us. And so we agreed, especially as a mountain team.
So we already had a split team at this point, and the first thing that I think we did as a team is to make sure as quickly as we could that we got confirmation from the three of them that they were okay, and gave them the mandate to just, do what you can to help, but stay there. Don't try to make it back to Kathmandu until we figure out what the picture throughout the country looks like. The next thing I think that bears mentioning, because a lot of listeners are going to be special operations professionals, is we also had an interesting dynamic where we had been in the country for 3 weeks and we had just received another special operations detachment with its own team leader, its own team sergeant, its own team of very experienced, qualified professional non-commissioned officers. And so one of the things that we had to line on fairly quickly, in fact, I remember that evening having this conversation, Mitch, with the team leadership and their team leadership, was like how we were going to organize, who was in charge, how we were going to engage with the State Department and the ambassador, because very quickly with people doing different things, you can start to miscommunicate or get in people's lanes. Mitch, you want to say anything there?
Remind me
no.
who the team leadership was for 2-6.
It was Pat Hyde was the team leader, did a great job the entire time that we were there in country. And Z was his team sergeant.
Yeah,
Z,
Pat and Z.
Zamora.
That's right. That's right. Awesome.
So it was a deliberate approach. It wasn't just like guys were just looking for work to get busy. We sat down as both teams. There's a table that's down there kind of where we were kind of finding places to stay. We were doing assessment. We're basically like, what's happening around us? What do we have available? And what is it we need to do now? At that point, we knew that the JSET was canceled. We had an opportunity to do something. And as a mountain team, we kind of gravitated toward the thought of there's issues. We know we need to do an assessment, but the assessment's got to be holistic to the country, not just the city. And so we started to kind of delineate along that approach. We didn't know what we didn't know. So there's, the unknown unknowns, the known unknowns, and the known knowns. Well, we definitely knew that there's issues in town, and that was going to be the first place that we checked out. And then kind of grow from there throughout the country and collect data, and then continue to reassess and make decisions.
So in terms of those things that we knew that we could do on the ground to provide value, and this was before really we had the conversation about doing the rescue operations, trying to get access to helicopter assets, is we have a very medic heavy team. We had, I think, 4 or 5 people who either current medics or had been medics in the past, like Mitch here. And so one of the things that we knew, having driven through on the first day, seeing all the destroyed buildings, was the hospitals are probably not in a very good spot. And then regardless, there's going to be displaced persons who are no longer either safe in their homes or their homes have been destroyed, who are going to be out living somewhere else on the street. So what we did is we put together a number of different trips out into Kathmandu to check on all of the different hospitals that the embassy had and we had on record. Found out that none of them were still standing and providing service. That was the first thing I think that really provided value. Is we did up an assessment for the embassy with grid locations of displaced personnel camps, the state of the different hospitals we had went to go check out, put that into kind of like a professional package for the people in the embassy who were not leaving for any reason.
Okay.
It was one of those things that this was kind of a challenge point, right? Department of Defense personnel, Department of State personnel, we're a little bit like oil and water the way we approach a problem set. And so we made the deliberate decision as we sat down as a team, is like, hey, look, we've got to, we don't expect, they're in the middle of this crisis. They're affected much more than we are. We are not going to expect them to come to us because we're not a part of their algorithm, their matrix, their decision-making plan. But we know we can bring a benefit and save lives and definitely help everybody around us. So we made the conscious decision to, like, how do we adjust the way we talk, the way we act, the way we interact with State Department personnel. There were some people that did not want us there. There were some people that did not want us to help and did not want us to do assessments, just assessments. They're like, that's not your job. We have personnel designated for that. And so we'd ask, like, who are these personnel and where are they? And they said, well, they're coming.
When are they getting here?
Yeah. Well, when are they coming?
We're here now. Let me do the work.
We're here now, and we've got communications. We can maneuver. We can provide this. By the way, we have like 5 medically trained and qualified personnel to go to these at least to these hospitals to give just an initial kind of bit of information for whoever the response team that's coming from the U.S. I believe they're coming from L.A. They at least will have something to work off of to prioritize their mission. So, like, they in their head, they might think, hey, I need to go to this place. But once they read our report, they realize it's easier for them to triage and decision make.
So you guys are 2 special forces detachments in country, in Nepal, right place, right time, right skill set, and able to flex to what you were doing, but chaos all around you. What was the reach back like to the battalion command, Lieutenant Colonel Josh Rates, back in Okinawa, Japan, where you guys were deployed from? What was that like, and what was his advice to you on the ground?
So I don't remember if it was the first day or the second day, but after we sent up an email just saying we're okay and here's what we've done, here's what we're doing, got a call from Colonel Rates, and his direction was clear. It was first to give the team leadership confidence that, someone had their back in terms of whatever decision that we were going to make. His point was, you guys are the exact right team to be in there at this time, and we fully support whatever decisions you make. Let us know what we can do to help, but we're not going to get in your way. You're on the ground, and you know the best thing to do, and we trust you to make those decisions. The second one was, he has had these experiences before, just like a sergeant major at the time did. There's only a small window in which you can do things that are non-standard before what we can call the bureaucracy or the rules or the conventional leadership comes onto the ground. So start trying to take over and say, you folks with beards shouldn't be here doing this. And also, why are you in uniform wearing a beard, or why aren't you in uniform? Whatever the answer might be. And so we knew we only had about a week before people started to show up to tell us what to do.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the phone call because we were in an RSO vehicle, lights and sirens, 4x-ing through rubble, through town. We're on like this phone, like, hello? Hey, how you doing, sir? Yeah. And then the CSM Shorter got on, and he's like, Shane Shorter's like, Mitch, how's the boys? It's like, boys are good. He's like, okay. He's like, you guys know what to do. You're there. We got your back. I was like, roger that. And then it was like, we knew that they had our top cover, which was nice. It felt really good because at the embassy, the defense attaché and the military personnel in that building that were pretty much Lieutenant Colonel no and Lieutenant Colonel or Colonel hell no. So they're like, no, they're risk averse, right? They don't want any Americans to be put in danger. They want to just hunker down and follow the algorithm of what to do in a disaster. Wait for the folks from the U.S. to come do their stuff. It was kind of a courtesy to kind of talk to these guys. We wanted to have our back, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like, if you don't have our back, that's okay. We can still get this job done and prove to you that we can provide something. But in order for that to happen, we then kind of had to go towards the Department of State channels. We knew that if we had the ambassador support and the senior staff support at that embassy, that trumps anybody else in that place. So that was kind of some of the people we started to interact with next, like more closely, more personally.
So you were able to overcome all that and just start doing things that actually made an impact out there, correct? Like for what I understand, you started commandeering helicopters and started going out and just actioning.
Yeah, I think so. Commandeering, the way that it happened was at the end of the second
I'm
day.
picturing some bearded Green Berets commandeering a couple of helicopters.
I can fly this thing. I watched Rambo.
I was on the pilot team.
Yeah. To set up then kind of like the exciting part that provided a lot of the value that Mitch has written extensively about. The end of the second day, we kind of hoped and we assumed, because it was an embassy in crisis, that there'd be some sort of like convening body or some direction put out saying, here's what's happening, here's what we need help doing, and here's what the entire team on the ground can help do to support people that are in a very bad situation. I didn't see that. And so my reporting up to, again, the soft channels, the special operations channels, not to the embassy, not to Washington, D.C., but through Special Operations Command and SOCPAC, which is Special Operations Command Pacific, was that the Nepalese government's domestic response is disorganized and ineffective. That's a verbatim quote from the report. And the second was, there's no command and control for any humanitarian assistance within the U.S. Embassy and no clear mission command for relief efforts. So knowing that and knowing that nothing was going to happen, there was the conversation I think that Mitch is alluding to with him, Josh, myself, where we said it's not going to be coming for us. Like, no one's going to give us a direction. No one's going to tell us to go do something. But we have a pretty incredible opportunity, if we can get this ambassador and his team on board, to maybe go out and try to help some people that are stuck in the remote areas that we had just come back from, like in the Annapurnas, Himalayas, etc.
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of some background as to how we it's not as cut and dry. There were some moments that helped us kind of grease the wheels, so to speak. A lot of late night work that we're doing. We're pretty much doing everything we can, like we said, in the embassy to help them out.
And are you guys living at the embassy too, by the way?
We were living at the embassy. Yeah, I was living under the stairs. He was living like sleeping. There was very little sleep going on, but when we did sleep, I was in a cardboard box with a warrant officer, and Dan would find just a random desk with some carpet, and like put his pack under his head. And this is, sleep for 4 hours, get up, see what's next to do. A lot of work involved trying to there. So one of these late nights where we're kind of getting after it, helping with the clinic and these other things, the ambassador was having some challenges finding also comfortable sleep. And I remember him talking to me one night. He's like, hey there, you're one of those special forces guys. And I was like, yes, sir. We're here to help out however we can. He's like, you know what I could really use help with? My mattress. And I was like, okay, show me what you got. So I go up to his office, and he's got an inflatable mattress. It's got one of those little things. It's like, like kids, like a kid's ball. You're going to open it up and inflate it. There's no motor to go with it. So I'm like, blowing up his mattress for like 45 minutes.
With the hot
The
air
secretary's
going
like,
into it.
well, while you're here, son, can you blow up my mattress too? And I'm like, sure. My face is like, probably red as a bee. Like, so after about an hour of blowing up these people's mattresses, it was just like some humility, right? It's like, we're just here to help. If this is the way that I can help, I'm happy to do it. From that to rescuing people, whatever it is you can let us do. And so it's stuff like that. And we go, so downstairs near the clinic, there was a senior Department of State person that was visiting the embassy at the time. And I remember a few of us were sitting in the hallway, kind of not on chairs, like in the hallway on the ground, kind of a little bit of exhaustion going on. And she walked over and she's kind of like, really appreciate your guys helping out. I can see everywhere I turn, you guys are helping. And we're like, that's what we're here for. And it's like, and we can do a lot more than this. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, we're a mountain team. We're acclimated to almost 18,000 feet. We know that there's people that are stranded and could be helped, and we'd be happy to do that as well. And so we're starting to plant the seeds of other things that we can do besides just stuff right around the embassy and in Kathmandu. And so you look at any kind of mission that we do out there in Special Forces and other places, you need permission. We got permission. You have to have authority, and you have to have fiscal authority. If you don't have fiscal authority and monies to back up what you're going to do, then you're just going to sit there and say, man, I'd really like to do the thing that I'm here for and I can improve for. But if I don't have the money to do it, my pockets are not that deep as an individual. So that was one of the moments where we didn't have the monies in our op fund to start to go into the hinterlands. But this lady had access to Department of State funds. And then we go down the path of getting that fiscal stuff from them.
Nice. So from inflating mattresses to saving people. Is that
Oh,
what
yeah.
you're-
Talk to us.
Yeah.
So help us and our listeners visualize what that search and rescue opportunities looked like, commandeering helicopters and going to get people on the bird and bring them back down from the mountains.
Well, first you have to know where to go. I'll let Dan talk about the consular office and how we're able to tap in all the phone calls coming from the U.S. and messages looking for their loved ones.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. So the first thing that we did as soon as we got access, because you needed a special badge to get in there, they eventually gave us access to it. In the consular office, which is typically staffed by foreign service officers, so think diplomats, you have other U.S. citizens, you also have Nepalese citizens who are there. Most of them have left because they're taking care of their family. What is clear is that the people who have remained and the people that were volunteering, you think Peace Corps volunteers, Fulbright scholars, there was some other, a couple doctors. No one had ever ran an operations center, which is not their fault, but no one knew what to do with all of these calls coming in saying, hey, I have a satellite phone, but I'm stuck here. People are dying. We're running out of food and water. There were people calling from the U.S. to the embassy saying, my husband, my wife, my kid is here in this area. Can you go check on them? People were writing notes down with sometimes grids or locations and names on notepads and then moving on to the next call. There was no command and control or organization. So one of the things that our very talented non-commissioned officers did was help provide order to this chaos. If someone calls in, here's where you record the information. It shouldn't go on this stray Excel document. We need to actually consolidate this information in a meaningful way so we can try to keep track of people who have been lost in this country.
That's fascinating to see, by the way, is you guys add an immediate value of what do you do with the information to organize it and then start shelling that out to people to go action.
It was the third day, and by this time we had a running list of over 50 U.S. citizens who are unaccounted for in the hard-hit high altitude and rural areas of Nepal. And so this is the time where we do a couple of things. We lobby for U.S. military helicopters from day 2 onward. That was part of my standing request, was trying to get helicopters into the country, always disregarded. And then the second thing was, to Mitch's point, it was not the person in the embassy's authority to give us money. But when we said to them in the consular office, look at all we're doing here, there are people that are lost. We have at least 50 names. Also, the acclimation, we just come down from Everest Space Camp, that doesn't last forever. If you want us to go back up there, the time is ticking. Yeah. But what we need is the ability to get up there. We don't have helicopters. You guys have money. Is it possible that we can, get some Nepalese helicopters to support our people to get out there to start pulling some of these Americans back? Mitch?
While we're chatting with them, we're like, hey, look, we're acclimated. This is a physiological thing that you cannot just shake and bake. It requires red blood cells and time. And there's search and rescue teams that were coming from LA. LA is at 0. And we had blood cells up to 18,000 plus. So look, these guys who show up, Yeah, they might be able to help in Kathmandu, but are they going to be able to rescue Americans in the Himalayas? No, they're not. Those people are left to the mercy of whatever's going on around them and likely going to perish. So, like, look, we can tap into that. Some of these pilots that are kind of like out there hunting anyway, hunting blind to try to find people. We had counterparts at the Mahabir Rangers that we were working with, but they were definitely a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of people they had to rescue that were their own countrymen. Oh, by the way, they're also digging out rubble of buildings trying to find people that are still alive under there. So we're like, look, we can fill a niche where we can rescue Americans and other people at altitude. And the other team that's here now, they can help rescue people and find people in Kathmandu and the neighboring areas that at this altitude before these search and rescue teams come. So that's what we started to they started to realize, once you explain that to them, they're like, okay, these guys actually have something that nobody else has and we won't get, period. Because you think about the Department of State, the U.S.'s response during moments like this. For the military, they call in for this area, be Task Force 505 coming out of Hawaii or in the MEU out of Okinawa. It's going to take weeks for them to get there. I mean, they're going to send in an assessment team before I even decide to send the rest of the people. And for the Department of State side, think about all the people that are going to try to get in. Oh, by the way, the airport is damaged, the runway's damaged, there's limited movements in and out. Time is obviously a factor, and we're here now. So we filled a need that they started to realize they had. And that was when we started to say, okay, once we started, and then the ambassador one night, he came down to us and he's burning the midnight oil again. He's like, thank you guys for everything you're doing around here. And we also said to him, we can do more. And he's like, tell me what you can do. And that's when we got the green light from the ambassador to push out of Kathmandu and into the Himalayas. That's when we sat down, we started to do some analysis as to what it would take, what we need, how we organize in order to do that.
And a point of reference here, the team from America that Mitch is referencing is a DART team, or a disaster assistance response team. And that is urban search and rescue, which at plus 6 or 7 days has limited utility in terms of actually saving lives. So when you think about what an embassy's posture is during a crisis, the mentality that people have about, can I go out and do something and solve this problem versus can I do what my job is during steady state, which is to send cables back to Foggy Bottom and keep them updated in terms of what the situation on the ground looks like.
Yeah. So at the time our warrant officer, he was a big toe going to the airport. I was kind of managing the guys, starting to organize once, and Dan was definitely interacting up higher. Typical SF stuff. I'm down planning operational stuff for the guys and what happens once we get the green light and the right equipment. How are we going to be aligned? And so the warrant officer's like, hey, I can go out to the airport and start to interact with folks out there. And he crushed it. He went out there and met up. He was basically knocking on doors of different helicopter companies and ended up kind of sitting down with Mingma Sherpa, who is he was the first Nepalese guy to summit all the 14 8,000 meter peaks. So Mingma, he was actually the helicopter that we had already kind of assessed potentially using in the future. Once you start to understand high altitude helicopters and their capabilities and also their limitations, you start to look at what helicopters have been overused. And so you can tell by looking at a rotor whether or not it's been overused. And the Simric Air guys were always crushing it. And so they had a good maintenance cycle, they had good pilots, and so they had a good work ethic. So Josh said, hey, I got a guy, he's willing to do this. And so we all went out there and had a powwow with him and sat down, and this was probably the most important question he asked us. He goes, first off, he's like, it's going to be very hard for me to give you any aircraft to use. We've already been kind of commandeered by the Nepal government for search and rescue, and they're designated what we do and where. And then he's like, and then after that, whatever's left over, we've got news people that want the latest scoop, and they're paying big bucks to get the extra flight time in order to get the story. And we're like, look, Mingma, we don't have big pockets, we don't have a lot of money. I was like, but we're going to go save people. Unlike, we're going to go out and save. He's like, are you only going to save Americans? And that was the biggest, most important question he asked us. And we're like, no. We're going to save everybody that we can, period. Everywhere we go, we're going to pull everybody out. And that's what we did.
All right, guys, so we're going to stop right there with the crisis story. And we want to back up a little bit, back to team life way before you were on this deployment. Take us back to where you guys were forming the team and your team culture.
Yeah. ODA 1121, right? So the only mountain team in Okinawa and the only mountain team in all of Asia, right? The only special forces mountain team in all of Asia, right? When I showed up, I remember looking at these guys, and it was a pretty young team. Most of the team had only been to Okinawa. Some of them did have some combat rotations from there, and a lot of them were just X-rays. They're bright though. They're bright, and so Okinawa we do a lot of J sets. So we're busy. You're constantly traveling, and we started to realize that these guys are bright, but they still kind of have that young mentality of like wanting to be told how to do things. And I think some people like to run a team like that. I think some people like it when whatever they say goes. It feels good. You're like, I do this, and they say Roger that, and they do it. Dan and I both wanted a team that asked why. They wanted the 5 W's plus. And so we wanted to create opportunities where they asked why. And then not only ask why, but then figure out how to find why and what and all the information in the absence of us giving them the exact information. And I think a lot of teams naturally do that. They want to kind of groom Green Berets to be like, okay, they come and ask you, how do I do this? And you say, go figure it out, right? That's a pretty common thing in SF. But we wanted to take it the next step. So initially we wanted to get them a lot of schooling. We were a very ASO heavy team. We had a lot of school training, but we didn't have a lot of experience on the ground. So a mountain team, for those out there who may not know what it is, just like a Halo team or a scuba team or a MAROPS team or a RUC team or a mobility team, all it is an infiltration technique. It's just a way to get from one point to another to actually do a Green Beret's job. So you have to be an expert at that infiltration technique. That's why you can only do one. But at the end of the day, you still have to do everything else that a Green Beret team and SFA team will do. Now, for us, because we're in Asia, there's a lot of mountains that fall along the borders of all these different countries. And should there be a requirement for us to move from across border, we trained heavily into be able to do cross-border movements. And in mountain teams, unlike a free fall team where you all kind of jump together, or a dive team where you all dive together, a mountain team is very easy to get separated. It's very easy to find yourself with your rope buddy because you can't rope in a whole team. It's very easy to find multiple routes, have to rely on your rope buddy in order to get to a link-up point for you to follow on, conduct whatever operation you're doing next. And along those notes, Asia is a really easy place for us to kind of practice. It's there are areas that are kind of sketchy, but there's a lot of places where, backpackers and trekkers and whoever goes, where a Green Beret can just kind of like blend into that kind of environment and get that kind of practice of just interacting with people and being comfortable being in places with a smaller element than being with your whole team. We purposefully designed training events where we would put our guys in two-man elements or three-man elements, or and then say, hey, okay, this is our next link-up point. You've got to figure out from here to there, and it could be days. And in some missions, we didn't even stay together. We didn't do centralized planning together. We did decentralized planning, and then we would do a kind of a check on learning, so to speak, where we come together as a team every once in a while. But we would engage with our partners in these countries in smaller elements purposefully. And that was to groom our guys to be decentralized. We wanted to see how they performed. We wanted to grow them. We wanted to give them kind of confidence in their ability to do stuff, but be in a position where we had their back and they knew it. And that kind of dynamic we had as a team kind of helped us in the event in Nepal. As we get closer to the Nepal kind of briefing and planning, I'll let Dan talk about how the mission dropped and what happened to kind of set the stage for that.
Before I get there, Mitch, one of the things I noticed, because Mitch was already the team sergeant by that time I got to the team, and I observed two things coming in as the new team leader, although I had been in the company for about 6 months as the XO. And one was the team was, to Mitch's point, young, and the second point was they are very smart. We had a really smart team. I think a lot of that lends itself to the ASO kind of inclination that our team had developed. But with those two things, there was the opportunity to do some incredible training. And so Mitch had mentioned that when we went to a couple of our J sets in like Thailand or Nepal or even like Red Flag, Alaska, one of the things we did was put our sergeant's first class, so our E7s, into leadership positions for mission planning. Because although Mitch and I could do that and would do that during a crisis, it was incredibly important to put them into a position where they're not just the senior Bravo or Charlie or Echo, but like if I'm the only person making decisions, what else do I have to think about and not be told what to do, but what things can I direct myself to do if it's just me making the call?
Hey, real quick, just for everybody, so just to make it very vague.
Yeah, ASO is just, it's the ability to really, well, you have to definitely know your environment a lot better in regards to, how to interact with people. That's like the biggest piece of it, is being able to interact with people. Some people, want to call it secret spooky shit, but it's really not. It's just the ability to kind of talk to folks and to listen to what they say. We can talk about this later on, but the way we do business, sometimes people kind of want to take this Jason Bourne mentality, and it's counterproductive, where you can actually find out all the information you need to know and do it in a completely good way with your counterparts anywhere you go. And then instead of you being like, oh man, I found out this cool information that this guy, was talking about in a bar. No, you come to find out that if you just interact with people and you're cool and you're above board in a lot of aspects, they're naturally going to help you. And it could be a military officer in a foreign country that you're like, hey, check it out. We're here to help you. And if there's things that we can do to help you out, we'll help you out. And you find that you have these relationships, you'll build them. And in Special Forces, we build them over a lifetime. I knew guys that were captains in some countries that then later on were generals and ministers of defense. You do this job long enough and go to the same countries, you just become really good. And it's not just a professional relationship. It's like, them, they know you. You've been to dinner at their house, you've seen their kids get married. And so if you approach it as a young Green Beret, as like, hey man, I'm trying to find this cool stuff about you and all, what you like, and do it in a weird way, you're not going to have a friend of him in 20 years. But if you just treat him like a brother, he'll treat you like a brother back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just build networks, right? If you had to boil it down.
Yeah, you just build networks.
So let's talk about like the call that we got in Thailand about, doing some joint training in Nepal. So we were already in Thailand doing some training with the special operations units there. And we got a call from our higher headquarters in Okinawa saying, just got a request from the embassy in Nepal. There was 43 people, both Nepalese and foreign hikers, that were just killed in the Annapurnas. This was back in 2014 during a snowstorm disaster. And they said one thing that came from that was an understanding that there was a lack of high altitude, high angle training on the part of the Bahabir Rangers, which is one of Nepal's special operations elements. And so they said, could you guys come here at some point, maybe in April of next year, to do training? That's the time when most people are out doing hiking. It makes the most sense. And that will give you some time to actually get trained up on some of those skill sets yourself so that you can put that training back to the Nepalese Rangers.
Yeah. So Special Forces mountaineering, like I said, is an infiltration technique. We very quickly were like, wow, the Himalayas are no joke, right? It is the holy grail of mountaineering. And oh, by the way, you make mistakes, you die at those altitudes. And so we had to really do an analysis. Like, it's one thing climbing rocks in Colorado or Washington or North Carolina, to go into the Himalayas and working avalanche rescue stuff. Like, that's different. That's a different ball game. That's like that's graduate level alpinist. And so we're like, well, who can we reach out to give us a hand? So, of course, we called up the Special Forces Mountain School, and we're like, hey, guys, we're getting ready to go to Nepal, and we're going to be training in high-altitude rescue, avalanche rescue, and stuff like that. And so we were able to scoop up the senior instructor, Ken Powell, out there. And so he joined us for this mission. And so that was a part of the planning factor. We're like, look, and not only that, you can help certify us at an additional skill and an airy kind of like avalanche capability that the team could use, because you're not working in a whole lot of snow and ice when you're in Okinawa. If you get mountaineering stuff, sometimes it's just jungle mountains, like in northern Thailand or something like that, which is required. You got to know how to climb, but it's not the same as the Himalayas. That stuff's serious.
When we were thinking about doing the mission planning, I recall many months in advance, we had been doing some Googling on Nepal and the interesting things to do there, because obviously we're going to train. We're also like, what else could we get into while we're there, either before or after the trip? And the idea started out as like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? But they'll never go for it. And that's doing the Everest Base Camp, which if you're going to do it yourself, it costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. It's not easy to get into Nepal. It's not easy to get from Nepal up to Lukla where you start the trek. And what was initially conceived of as like, that's never going to work out as a pipe dream was bought off almost immediately, because if you really want to train a foreign force at high altitudes, you need to be acclimated yourself, or else you're subject to all the things that Mitch has mentioned about making bad decisions at high altitudes. So getting that approved was like once in a lifetime opportunity, but also I would think pivotal in terms of getting our guys the altitude experience they needed before the rescue operations.
Yeah, so I mean, we were going to operate at the plan was to go to Jomsom and then work basically kind of near the base of Dalgiri, where at about 16,500 feet during trekking season, that's kind of the lowest point. You start to run into some glaciers, and so we would pretty much be living at 14,000 feet for several weeks. So we knew we needed to acclimate. We knew we needed to build some red blood cells. We're like, you know what? Maybe they'll buy off on going to Everest Base Camp. It's totally doable. There's a lot of good infrastructure. It makes sense, and they did. And so one of the things, like, I put this challenge out to any other Special Forces mountain team or Special Forces team that's been in Nepal, and because the guys we went with from the Mahabir Rangers and our Trek kind of our Sherpa buddies, they said, you are the first Special Forces team that we have seen that 100% of you have made it to base camp. They said every other time we've taken SF guys, not everybody makes it. So my gut tells me, I was like, well, as a mountaineer, I kind of know why, because I see Special Forces culture and I know mountaineer culture. Being a mountaineer, you do things slowly, methodically, and being in Special Forces, it's a competition, right? You go to the range, it's a competition. You do anything, it's competition. Well, getting to base camp getting to altitude is not a competition. It is a purposefully designed event to acclimate to altitude. And so when we sat down, like, yeah, we could throw 9 days at it and just climb up the mountain as fast as we could, but we know we'll lose people. It's guaranteed. Somebody will get high altitude sickness. We're like, what's a make sense time frame where we all are able to make it to there? Really acclimating to altitude is just time. And that's a tough thing to try to do when you're SF guys, when you want to be like, go, 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 go. So we purposely went slow and did it correctly.
You got anything to add to that, Dan, before we move on to the next one?
Knowing that we're going to do this, we also knew we were going to try to summit Thorong Ri, which is a mountain near the training area, which is at about 21,000 feet. It's kind of a camaraderie event with the Rangers that were there in Nepal. And so we were looking forward to doing that as well. When we went to brief our battalion commander, Josh Rates, and Command Sergeant Major Shane Shorter, we had a very robust plan. We had a lot of mountain experience. We were bringing in an expert from the Special Forces Mountain School. We had done the planning. All this stuff felt good. And so when we went in to brief the commander, we were recocked. He looked at us and he's like, you have a good plan. He's like, it's a bold, what was the words he used? That's a bold plan. And he liked it. So every time we would brief the battalion commander,
here it comes.
we would pull out the Special Forces mountain horn. I started a drinking gimmick when I was there when I first started out. It was when we were at Red Flag, Alaska, and I was like, we need a drinking gimmick. All good teams have a drinking gimmick, and we're a mountain team. So while we're in Alaska, we picked up some doll sheep horns at a taxidermist, and we were drinking out of these things with no liner or nothing. It was like, it tasted like Bigfoot's junk, man. It was fucking bad. And but we're like, yeah, whoa. And so we carried these horns everywhere we went. We eventually put some silver in them, and so where you could drink at, so you could invite other people to drink with you, and them not being weird. No floaties in it.
For our audience, you obviously can't see this. It's like it's a horn. It's a ram's horn the size of Mitch's arm that is lined with silver. It wraps around his arm. He's actually drinking out of it right now.
Now you called it a mountain horn. Did you guys make this, or is this really a thing?
Yeah. So the backstory of the mountain horn is it took like 3 or 4 countries to find somebody that would make silver for it. We were in Indonesia. I remember asking a silversmith and trying to translate. I want you to put silver in a horn, doing the hand arm signals. They just look at you like, no, you want to buy some silver out of my cabinet, you can do that, but no. And so finally we were it was in Thailand, and we were in northern Thailand, Chiang Mai. And one of our interpreters was like, you're looking for what? I'm like, we're looking for a silversmith. We haven't had a lot of luck, but if you know of any silversmiths in the area that would line a drinking horn. And the interpreter was like, actually, I grew up in the silver quarter of Chiang Mai. Let me take you and introduce you to a guy I think that might be able to do that. And so we went out there, and the older gentleman was there in Chiang Mai in the old quarter. He was like, how fast you want this made? And we're like, 3 weeks. He's like, I do like a challenge. And so he did. He made us some drinking horns. And then after that, it kind of took off. So all the team daddies after me and the team guys after me, it is a permanent thing to that ODA. There's the Special Forces Mountain Drinking Horn. They've only made the horns bigger and more ridiculous than I made it. So it's
awesome.
been a fun thing. It's a good way to like have some camaraderie, right? Like it's hard to make relationships in a boardroom, but it's pretty easy to make them in a bar. So that's kind of the concept. When you're working with local nationals, most of them drink, and so if you can bring out a nice gimmick and then share it around, it's just one more way to kind of build that network.
But when you were getting recocked, you had this horn out, and it was loaded, right?
Yeah, had the horn out. So we would tell the commander, like, you're only allowed to drink from our horn if you approve our mission. And so it had worked every other time before this one. And so one of the guys on the team was back along the wall. He had already prepped it. We're like, we felt good. Our chests are puffed. We're like, oh yeah, we're good. This is a good mission, good plan. We're solid. Boom, bang, bang. And then he's like, I'm not approving this mission. And it was like, wah, wah. You're like as a Green Beret, you don't want to ever hear that. You're like, oh. You're like, it's like instant, like you got stabbed in the heart. You're like, oh.
Just
You're kind of like, okay, I wasn't ready for that. And so then you kind of have to, and then it's important to be humble, right? We're not always right. And we weren't right at this moment. And in hindsight told us that when we were in Nepal. So he was so Josh Rates he had some mountaineering experience. And he's like, you're going to go to some pretty high altitudes. I don't feel like your communications package is appropriate for the mission that you're doing. I think you're taking on too much risk there with comms. He's like, and I think that you're taking on too much risk for support. He's like, you're going to the altitudes that high. You need somebody that's kind of at a base camp that can run comms and also potentially chow and logistics. And it's like, he's right. When you think about it, all the best mountaineers out there, very few of them do it just solo by themselves. There's a few, but everybody else has buddies to help them that stay at base camp. And that's what we needed. And so we got recocked. So I'll let Dan, I've talked long enough. Let Dan talk about what we did after the recock.
No, I think you've hit most of it. So, there was a discrete number of things that Colonel Rates and Sergeant Major Shorter said. Although this would be ideal in an ideal situation, you have to plan for a less than ideal situation. And the points that Mitch hit on were you need more people to help you. You need a more robust support package that you can trust to do things on their own without a lot of direction from you. Because every day we were going to, the actual plan, Mitch, I don't know if you remember this, the actual plan for the JSIT looked absolutely miserable. Every day we're going to have to hike for 2 hours to get to the training site, up in the mountains, and then hike back after doing training. It was going to be terrible. We weren't going to have the bandwidth to do anything beyond that when we got home. And the second thing was communications. And so I remember just being very frustrated after being told no, like we all do, right? And if you're told no, your plan's not good, you're going to take that personally, especially because our team had done some pretty interesting non-standard things in Asia before that required maturity and autonomous decision-making on the part of our staff sergeant, sergeant first class, and the team leadership. In hindsight, we would not have been positioned, postured, or equipped to do the things that we did if not for that. And I think that's a really important point, even for experienced team sergeants like Mitch, experienced warrant officers like Josh and myself. You have to make sure that when you go into a plan, you plan just not for the ideal JSIT scenario, but for what could happen that requires you to do things without support for multiple weeks.
If I could reframe that real quick, Dan, position, postured, or equipped, you just described contingencies and contingency planning and the process of how you guys thought about contingencies, which again, as we all know in special operations or in the military in general, every plan only survives first contact. And I think you guys were, again, pretty damn well planned out, but a couple other things to think about from the outsider's perspective that the battalion command team reiterated to you and allowed you guys to go in and say, yep, you're right. Let's focus more on our contingencies just in case, and that's the bread and butter of special operations. And you guys took that very humbly. We're challenged with it. Yep, we're going to recock. We're going to do this again, and think through even deeper of what those contingencies could be, and it obviously played dividends.
What?
Yeah. After we kind of dusted off our egos, we then started to kind of hammer down as to what he didn't give us like how to do it. He just said you need to do it. And so then we started to really shake the tree, for mountaineering perspective and these high altitudes, like really shake the tree, how we could make comms. We knew it had to be sat. And so at that point, we were using even experimental stuff that was gifted to us or loaned to us by some companies. Like we were starting to make phone calls. We were like, okay, what can we make? And so we had an excellent commo guy, a commo chief in Okinawa at the time that was helping us out as well. So that was where we got like the Thuraya IP Plus, which is basically a Wi-Fi router that runs off a satellite, which is it's not something that we typically carry, but we brought that. It was huge. We all had satellite messengers. So basically, this was the early days when satellite messengers weren't really a thing yet. They were just kind of started to come out. And so at the time, we had a bunch of DeLorme satellite messengers, which now it belongs to Garmin. Those things were clutch. We had Iridium phones. We had Thuraya phones. We had a pace plan for like every guy. So
and we made Johnny Farrell like hump up to Everest Base Camp, an actual like old. Gosh, I don't remember what kind of radio it was, but it had the antennas and everything. Just in case everything else failed, we had that thing too.
Yeah, and of course, these are some civilian stuff, but we also had our SF comms. We still had the radio and the sat antenna and all the good old stuff that you would take to like a combat zone or something, or like sat on the go type thing.
Well, that kind of ancient soft saying of like 2 men in a radio, right? You can impact and you can do so much with just the ability to communicate and lay out what information looks like and kind of paint the picture for decision makers. Like that's exactly what you guys were doing.
Yep, exactly right. And it actually helped. Like there's people who they couldn't contact their families too, right? We found ourselves like people would wait in lines to like contact their families to say they're okay, even just a benign thing that
sign of
just
life.
being cool, right? That we were like, hey, I've got. If I'm not doing something important right now, you can absolutely make a phone call, tell your family they're okay, and that was just being cool about it.
Mitch, in terms of like a reputation and rapport, when I was assigned to the embassy in Dhaka, a diplomat actually came up to me and said, "You don't remember me, but you let me call my family right after the earthquake because you had one of the few working phones." She had actually been in Nepal at the time, and I didn't remember. But yeah, it's an interesting point.
Let's back up real quick because I want to go back to your team culture. From what it sounds like, from what you're describing, is you guys built this team culture of a growth mindset versus a no-fail mindset, to where you did have this setback and it was a kick in the nuts, but instead of sitting there complaining about it, you took it and you became a better team because of it.
Yeah. And Chuck, to that point, one of the things that Mitch and I harped on, especially with our sergeants first class and staff sergeants, was planning is indispensable. And even down to the staff sergeant level, we need to be able to teach you how to do planning. And what hurt as a team leadership through that experience was we had shown that we didn't even do planning to the sufficient level required to conduct this mission. So it was, I think, also good and helpful for our team to see, gosh, this is not a fake thing that we're being told to do by Mitch, Dan, and Josh. This is something you have to do to be successful in a foreign country.
Yeah, and it's important to have a learner's mindset, right? It's always good to have somebody else's opinion, especially somebody that has a lot of experience, like a battalion commander. And it's tough, but it's important to be able to take that and work with it. You absolutely should work with it.
There's always that difference between failure and defeat, right? And if you can always live in that mindset to where every setback is going to make you stronger, then you always will be, right?
Yeah.
All it did is fuel us. It fueled us even more. Yeah.
One of the lessons learned I had from that, not just that mission, but multiple trips with the team, is what makes Green Berets different from conventional forces, and I'd argue even other SOF, is the maturity and the decision-making authority you can push down to the lowest levels. Like I said, the entire team, everyone was just very smart, motivated, but you need to stay humble. And I think it's very easy in special operations to lose track that even if you've been in for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, there's a lot that you might not be thinking about, and every mission is not the same as the one before it, and you have to be willing to be told that you're wrong in order to learn.
Yep. You always got to be humble enough to understand that every time you're moving into something new, you need to learn to be relevant, right? Otherwise, you just won't be.
So once we got told no, it motivated us. It focused us. It could have crushed us, but it hurt our feelings in the beginning. But all it does was put a boot in our butt and lit a fire in our hearts, and kind of like go after. Okay, so what is he looking for? And then, that absolutely makes sense. And then once we started to look at all the issues that we I would say we glossed over, it absolutely made sense to reapproach it and to look at it harder in those contingencies. And that's what we did. And it was successful because of it.
Hell yeah. So the moral of the story there too is if you find yourself in a situation where you get recocked, it's not the end of the world. Take it and use it to better yourself and your detachment or your special operations team if you're not an ODA.
Hey, gents, and Mitch, I know you like to beat the drum on this one, but for both of you, as you told the story towards the beginning of this episode, relationships matter and your partnerships absolutely mattered. Talk to me about how important those partnerships were going into it and relying on those partnerships throughout the events and the crisis that you guys endured on the ground.
Well, I'll talk real quick about some key partnerships, and Dan can kind of maybe dive in a couple of them. Well, obviously, we had a really good relationship with our command team. We had to. Otherwise, think about all the people that could have put our plan to save people's lives, could have told us no, and it would be a real no. So the first one would be our commander, right? If we didn't have that kind of relationship and trust between our command team through Josh Race and Shane Shorter, then we would have never left the embassy. We would have hunkered down, right? So they trusted us. Yeah, they trusted us and we trusted them, and we had a lot of back and forth. We also had a really good relationship with the command team, and they actually came out later to help us out, and we'll talk about that later. But so then when we got on the ground, obviously we had to have a good relationship with the Department of State because of the ambassador. And to that point, actually, the ambassador in years past didn't like Green Berets. From a couple experiences from previous missions in Nepal, he kind of had a bad taste in his mouth from us. When we were there, we had to kind of overcome that paradigm.
Can you go into specifics, like why? Were they legit?
What was the loss of rapport at that level with the
there's two key events. One, there was an airborne operation. So the ambassador, he has his quirks. He's an individual. He didn't miss any meals. He's kind of a big fella. And he didn't like being out in the elements for very long.
He was well-rounded.
He's a well-rounded gent. And so he was on it. There was an airborne, there was a company JSET where they had an airborne op. And they told him, hey, sir, we're going to have an airborne op out here. You're free to come out and join and watch. And so he said yes. He came out to watch. You know how airborne ops go. You're at the mercy of the weather and all this kind of stuff, right? Aircraft and weather. And so the jump ended up getting pushed and scratched. And so he was sitting out in the heat of the day, and nothing happened, nothing cool to watch. It kind of pissed him off. He's like, man, you guys are wasting my fucking time. And so, you don't want to go out and get your time wasted. So we wasted his time on an airborne op in years past. And then there was also a certain gentleman who was doing some ASO stuff that overstepped his bounds. And so, and the ambassador definitely didn't like that. He got kicked out of country. And so, that was the dynamic that we came in on. We were coming on the heels of a couple kind of events that the ambassador didn't like, special forces in particular. So we knew that kind of going into it, and knew that, hey, humility is important, and building a relationship with this guy is imperative. And so we did. We took our time. We didn't push it, and we showed our worth however we could, and that kind of built that relationship.
By blowing up his mattress, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Talk about humility.
And
man.
Feeding him at the embassy.
Humility.
Brilliant.
And we fed him. We gave him a mattress.
So you wind him and dine.
No, but that's important, right? Those are small things, but
they're small things. Yeah.
Little
things matter.
Never be too good to sweep the sheds, right? That's pretty important.
Yeah.
Little things matter. Also, this is Nepal, right? This isn't America. This is somebody else's country. And so the relationship we had with the Mahabir Rangers, we knew that it was a tough situation for them, right? This is their country. This is their countrymen that are in dire straits. And so we would take trips out to their compound before we started to initiate rescue operations. And we were having some dialogue with them. I'll let Dan talk more to that. If we didn't have a good relationship with those guys, they could have squeezed on Mingma Sherpa and his folks to be like, no, don't give those Green Berets anything. And then we would have been stuck at the embassy still. So those were three key relationships that were needed to be successful there.
I want to pick up on something Mitch had mentioned about the history that special operations, specifically special forces, so Green Berets, had in Nepal. A lot of embassies have a standing contingent of special operations forces who have a permanent spot in the embassy. They have since after 9/11. We call them in different countries like military liaison elements. Sometimes they don't have the same authorities. You might call them like special operations liaison elements. In Asia, we call some of them PATs or Pacific or PACOM augmentation teams. And when the Green Berets were asked to leave, what they didn't want to lose is connection back to Special Operations Command Pacific. And so all the SF guys had to leave, but they left a civil affairs team in the embassy. And I mention that because I think it's helpful for especially team leaders and team sergeants when they think about being in foreign countries, working with and through embassies, to realize that when you are working for SOCPAC or SOCCENT or wherever it might be, you're not under chief of mission authority. And that means a few different things. One of which is, although you absolutely need to keep the ambassador, him or her, on your side whenever you're trying to do something, because they can just ask you to leave, your actual direct line of responsibility still goes back to the Special Operations Command that's forward deployed. So for ours, it's SOCPAC back in Hawaii. Because we walked in with beards, sweaty, wearing like outdoorsy gears, and some of our guys were really good and very good at being like calm. Some of our guys were a little bit more, like big tattoos and look more aggressive. We really had to try to put the best foot forward and be as soft spoken and quiet as possible to try to get all of these people to trust us. If that didn't happen, and like when you think about your foreign service officers, your diplomats, they just like special forces guys, like run a gamut. And some of them were very disinclined to want us in their room talking to them during the early days until we did the things that Mitch is mentioning.
Did Josh Phillips roll up in a tank top with his like?
It's like, goddamn man, like roll down your sleeves.
Yeah, Josh Phillips is like 250 pounds of muscle and tattoos. He looks like he's just gonna. I mean, he's the nicest guy, but he looks like he could crush your trachea with his pinky. And so, like
with the Florida
to
State
some
hat.
Department of State folks, that's a little. The nonverbal aggression to them is a thing. Like they're wired different than an SFT.
That's a good point. A lot of times we're just offensive to them for almost no reason, but you have to overcome that in almost every situation because we're always have to work with an embassy in most countries, even in combat zones. Right.
I'm going to steal this from Curtis Price over at 2nd Special Warfare Training Group. And looking at the soft truths, number 3, competent special operations forces cannot be created after emergency or crisis. I think this kind of plays into what could be a future soft truth too, and tying into the relationships and partnerships is that, we're the world's premier partnership force. Competent relationships can also not be generated after an emergency. They have to be tended over time. They have to build through trust, through mutual respect, through true, genuine relationships have to be built. And I think you guys are describing here is how you and other SF teams that have gone before you had done that over time in order to allow you the access to do what you guys were doing on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's relationships with foreign nationals is our bread and butter, right? And the Mojave Rangers were a part of that. Now, it's interesting how, you can't build this kind of response after a crisis, which is true. We have designated surgical strike, kind of hostage rescue. People think crisis and special ops and special forces. They think rescuing hostages. And
Iranian hostage crisis, right?
Crisis is crisis. It involves hostages and surgical strike, finding a high-value target at 2 a.m. and, smoking them. But in the real world, that happens once in a while. It does. And there are units that have to take care of that. They do a great job doing it. But for Green Beret teams and other soft units, you're not going to do that. You are going to be in a country and very likely going to find yourself in a crisis involving none of that. It is possible, but it's more likely, especially in SOCPAC in Asia, you're going to find yourself in a crisis that has to do with a catastrophic event due to Mother Nature, the weather, the earth, all that stuff. And so that has to be in the back of your mind whenever you go anywhere. It has been in mine, obviously, because I, kind of found out the hard way as I grew up on a team. But it is very realistic for a team to be somewhere from SOF and have to be a reactionary unit. And if you're not planning for that, then you're not going to react. You're going to be sitting there with your thumbs, on your thumbs or whatever, in an embassy saying, wish I could do something. But because you don't have the equipment, the training, the right relationships, all that stuff that hasn't been prepped, you haven't prepped that battlefield, you're not going to war against Mother Nature and helping people out. And it's going to gut wrench you to sit there on the sidelines.
All right, guys. Hey, going back to the crisis response now, let's take it from where we left off, where you guys are about to get hot and heavy in action. Mitch.
So we knew that we had to purposely go to some place to start rescuing people that we knew where they were all over the Himalayas. We purposely decided to go to Everest Base Camp because we knew that it would be above the cut line for people to report, and reporting matters. And this would be public reporting. We knew that public opinion would matter because once we started to go outside of the embassy, the public's going to see what we're doing. So we decided on Everest Base Camp because we knew that there was a big avalanche. I knew of a guy who lost his fiance there to the big avalanche. So we went there knowing that the reporter is going to report U.S. response very quickly. So that's a big deal. We're going to make it look like the United States can and will respond very quickly during a crisis. And reporters are it's going to be free press. So we go to Everest Base Camp. We end up pulling out some people that were injured. And we also pulled out the Google exec's remains at the time. I gave up my seat in the helicopter so that his remains could be repatriated. So, which left me and one of the combo guys in Lukla. But that absolutely did what we purposely designed it for. It was above the cut line. People reported on it. The United States knew now that Americans knew, and even foreigners knew, America was there, and they were responding.
Was there any PRC response that you guys know of on the ground?
Oh, well, you're opening up a can of worms if you want to do that. So I think there's I think it was President Kennedy who put down crisis in Chinese. I've read some things like crisis in Chinese is 2 characters. It's like something and opportunity. I don't know. It's like disaster and opportunity or something like that. So Chinese cultures, they absolutely take opportunity in crisis. And they did respond. Several other countries responded. This is why I said before I want to talk about being cool about shit and not being nefarious. They showed up. They were nefarious. Other countries showed up. They were nefarious. They would come in with a helicopter and they pull out 2 people from their country while there's 30 people standing on the sidelines waiting to be rescued. Dire straits. And they're pulling out only their countrymen. That's fucked up. So that's why when we told Mingma, we're going to pull out everybody we can. And that's what we did. And that bought us a reputation and the word started getting out. So when we showed up, people were like, you're the Americans. And initially we were trying to play it cool and say, hey, people were asking us, who are you and why are you here? And we show up, we'd be like, hey, we're Americans. We're with the United States Embassy. Is anybody here injured or needs medical help right now? That's how we triaged. We also usually parked a helicopter ways away because there was reports of people jumping into a helicopter and dying, being killed by the rotary blades. So we'd park a ways off, hike in, find the distranded, or the hikers, whoever was stuck in whatever place, come into them and say, hey, look, we're here to help you out, triage them. And they would be like, you're with the U.S. Embassy? And they look at us and we're like, yeah, look at us, Yeah, we're embassy guys.
Beards and Arcteryx.
Very quickly, they saw through that bullshit, right? They're like, you're not from the embassy. Like, well, we're actually U.S. Green Berets, and we're here to help you out. So just get on the fucking helicopter. And they're like, I knew that. Okay. And they're like, America. Remember this Irish guy was like, look at you and your Americans. They're everywhere. They rescue people. My country won't even answer my phone call. So the word started getting out, and we very quickly kind of built a reputation for the United States of America, being the kind of expeditionary arm initially on the ground.
Dan, let's move into some of those key takeaways and lessons that you wanted to cover with the group.
Sure. Well, I think before we get to the overall takeaways, there's a few other things that happen, I think, that drive home some of the points here. So this is the end of the 4th day. We have a Special Forces detachment of 12 men, 3 of which have been the entire time in a different part of the country. Now, my team sergeant and my junior communications sergeant are at Lukla, which is the start of the Everest Base Camp trek, and they're staying there, and they're not going to come back for days, right? So we have, at least at this point, a team in 3 different locations, all having to be trusted to make the good decisions for themselves, for the people that they're trying to help, and for the country, right? What happened after that was essentially a series of days whereby we had to go through an abbreviated planning process, because every time that we had people coming back from any of the helicopters that we sent out, they would get new information and new reports of people who had been killed, people that were injured, that they heard about, that they had lost track of trying to get down the mountains. And some of the people that had been picked up, we weren't able to get all the way back to Kathmandu. Some of them had to go to kind of triage centers somewhere between the top of the mountains and the bottom, because you only have so much fuel in these aircraft going at high altitudes through the winds in very dangerous areas. And so a lot of the reporting that went back to the United States came from our team, our staff sergeants and sergeants first class, who came back, who had seen the only images on the ground, or we're sending back the only images on the ground of what it looked like in some of these places. And some villages were completely wiped off the map, which is why, they weren't getting any response from the people who had lived there, to include Americans overseas.
One of the toughest moments was when we went up to Longtong Valley. You've got a village up in these kind of picturesque, very steep mountain valley. We went up there to recon it, to look at it. We knew that it was bad, but there's no information. We just knew that there's issues up there. As we're flying over Longtong, the village in there, it was gone. It was completely gone. About 10,000 feet of mountain face and ice and dirt had filled in the valley. And then outside of that area, so hundreds of feet of dirt and ice have filled up the valley. And all the trees that were south of that or north of that or whatever had been blown over like by an atomic blast. Every tree was flat. And there was remains of folks in those trees, some people that we had not gotten to in time that looked like they had died of their injuries. And so we were able to repatriate some of them and bring them back to their embassies. That was one of our last flights, trying to look for people that we knew were in an area. The toughest part was there's two boys.
So what Mitch is referencing is there was two brothers who, after about 5 days of not hearing from their sister, who was in that village of Longtong, had bought the best communications gear they could find, flew to Kathmandu, had tried to pay for a Nepalese helicopter to do what they did in partnership with our team, which is go out there and check on that village, whereas the last time they had gotten communication from the sister. So we sent the two of them and one of our non-commissioned officers to the site so they could look and get firsthand confirmation that the entire village was utterly destroyed with no survivors.
Oh, wow. How many people were in that village?
400, probably.
Oh,
400 to
wow.
500.
Yeah, and then two young American girls who are trekking by themselves with some Sherpas, I believe.
It was a pretty gnarly event up there. It was tough because the two young men were like, we still want to look. And we're like, hey, man, we don't want to leave you here. Like, this is a bad area. There's nothing. There's no infrastructure. People are leaving this country, not coming here, right? And they're like, we have to. So same thing I'd do, right?
Yeah.
We dropped them off. I said, hey, make comms with me every night. If we don't hear from you, we're going to come back and get you. So they use their satellite communicator to message us every night, their updates as to where they were. Of course, their sister was gone, but very cool that they were there to look for her. Tough event, tough moment.
All right, guys. So moving towards the end of the story, what do you guys want to capture here as far as, important lessons or events that happened there that should be captured in this podcast?
There are a few lessons learned, and I want Mitch and I to talk about those. We're missing actually a bulk of the rescue things and some of the dilemmas that the team faced, but I don't know if we get time for that. So one of the things that was unique was on the sixth day after the earthquake at 1:45 in the morning, I get a call from the embassy saying, we just found out from SOCPAC that you guys aren't allowed to leave the embassy again. Whoa. Because... And then the answer was, no one at SOCPAC knows what you're doing. There's no airworthiness assessment on the helicopters that you're using. And I don't have a CONOP here to approve you to leave the embassy to go do anything in a dangerous environment. So this was the first time. This was the sixth night. This is the first time in a bed. And I just lay down. So I was like, okay, well, part of me is relieved because this is a lot of people running and this is dangerous. There's not a lot of sleep. We're all exhausted. I was like, is this an out? I sat there for a second and thought, no, this is horseshit. I don't think they understand what's actually happening on the ground. And I've been sending some really clear and concise reports on what we're doing and why it matters. So what I did is I sent two emails. I sent an email to Colonel Rates to say, here's what I just got. I believe that this is the wrong answer for a lot of reasons. I sent another email to the Special Operations Civil Affairs Officer, who was the one who would call me, outlining my thought process. The next morning, we had a mission planned. I believe the mission to go up to Longtong. Yeah, it was Longtong. And I get a call from Colonel Rates, and he says, Dan, I think there's just been a miscommunication. I think what you guys are doing is absolutely in the best interest of both our country and SOCPAC, and I think they just need to better understand. But they're in Hawaii, and so there was a 3-day weekend. And so from the time that I started sending my reports to the time that somebody at SOCPAC woke up to start reading them, they were like, hold on. This is not approved. You guys can't do this. Colonel Rates' call was like, we have your back. Make the best decisions, and no one's going to question you after the fact. We'll take care of you and the team, which is fine, and it's good, and it gave us the confidence to make the decision. but there's still like the direct line of legal authority from the SOCPAC commander down to the detachment commander when you're on a JSIT or a mission overseas. And it still puts the team leadership in an interesting position to make a call without confirmation from the person who has the actual legal authority to say yes, to continue doing operations.
So this is one of those moments where we kind of, as a team, we had, before this had happened, we had sat down where we were kind of looking at the situation, and we're sitting in the MC one late one night, and we're like, hey guys, let's all talk about this. Like, we could just sit here. We could just sit here until it all blows over and we get flights home. But we know we can do more. We also know that this is a gray area. This is a gray area that could bite us in the ass. If somebody had died, then I, knew the risks of that professionally and personally. Like, we all knew that there's risks. There's significant risks to this. Anytime you're going in these structures and these villages and these people, there's risk. You're going high up in the mountains, knowing that you might get left there for days. Each time we'd pack out for days of food, days of preparation, and the possibility that you have to walk out of the Himalayas on your own. We knew that there's risk, and we also knew that there's professional risk, like as to what we were doing. There was no design flow. There probably still isn't. And this is one of the things I wrote about when I was still in. There's no flow. There's no set aside con op saying, break this in case of crisis. Oh, here's the fiscal authority set aside for this crisis. There's not. And I would hound this when I went to SOCPAC for years. I'd say, hey, check it out. If somebody finds themselves in a situation like that, think about the 13 boys that were rescued out of that cave right in Thailand. We had SOF on station, but they got improved after the fact. But there's always situations where they need help. And if we're there to help them, if we don't have the right approvals in place on the books, then you're at risk by doing any kind of operation like this.
There was probably nothing in any X-Sword that would even come close to covering anything you were doing out there, right? If I had to guess.
Right, there isn't. There should be.
And I think we're going to drive to this with the lessons learned, not just for Special Forces team, but for embassies and other elements conducting operations in foreign countries. From start to finish, our operations lasted for 9 days. The final day, I have it written down here, we brought back 6 Americans, 2 British, 2 German, 1 Austrian, 1 Vietnamese, 1 Argentinian, and 12 Nepalese, right? That's not what other countries were doing. And I think that the press that came from that is what allowed us to continue operating for the time that we did. The next thing that I want to hit on in terms of a lesson learned is it is not the embassy's posture or thought process during a time of crisis to think about what can we do that's expeditionary that goes out and solves a problem. They're going to retreat back into their tortoise shell, which for a lot of situations is probably the right answer, because unless you have a special forces detachment or a special operations detachment on the ground, they don't have people with the training, experience, or equipment to go do anything other than get themselves into trouble. You want to talk about that point?
Yeah. So, I mean, the design that's in place for the Department of State to respond to a crisis, it takes a long time, and it's typically measured in tons of food delivered. They don't do this. They don't do crisis response. The embassies aren't hardwired for this. Anytime the America responds to moments like this, it's tonnage of food, tents, blankets, things of that nature. It's not truly saving lives that are at risk at the moment. When things of that nature happen, it's something that people are kind of on the fly working through that contingency. There's nothing really on the books to kind of like have their back.
Hey, Dan, talk us through the situation on the ground with the Marines and as support was coming in to Nepal and how you guys worked and navigated through that situation.
So plus 1 week from the earthquake, we started getting advanced elements of the force that is postured to do what essentially happened, which are the Marines that come not the day after the disaster, but roughly a week or a week and a half after, to do the humanitarian assistance things that are still vital and needed during a disaster like this, right? So like dropping off tarps and waters to villages, things of that nature. The advanced party included like senior officers from this task force. And my assumption was that having been on the ground for over a week, that they would link up with us and start asking us questions with the humility you need walking into a crisis regarding where there were still Americans or people that needed assistance, what sort of barriers we're encountering, not only with local government, but also like infrastructure issues. And then finally, like we were the team in the country from the American perspective with experience at high altitudes, trying to fly through these mountain passes. Perhaps it was the beard.
Beards cure everything, right? Non-threatening. Don't fear the beard. Don't fear the beard.
Yeah, it was the beard. Maybe I should have shaved. But there wasn't that knowledge transfer. And I can't draw a direct line between that and what happened, but I will say that it's important as conventional leaders to understand that if there are forces, conventional or unconventional, or even non-military on the ground with experience, part of what you need to do is get a lay of the land before you take charge and say, here's what's going to happen.
We advised, though, to this end, and they didn't listen to us one bit.
We did make advices that to fly in this area, especially above 10,000 feet, with the winds and with the terrain, with the cloud cover, and the fact that a lot of very talented pilots die in Nepal flying, that you need things like oxygen, and you need to do good and complete map reconnaissance. The day that we left, which was almost 2 weeks in, a Marine helicopter crashed. When we were leaving, we heard that they had lost communication. By the time that we landed in Thailand for a couple of days of R&R, they had found the crash site. 13 people had died. And it was just truly a sad and terrible end to what was a good success story for American assistance in the country.
As we did the analysis to flying through these mountains during our rescue operations, we started to do the analysis as to what helicopters might be able to be beneficial to the response, the HADR response. There were Chinook helicopters kind of in theater also that we're like, hey, you should remission them. If you're going to start flying around Americans and flying around supplies, you need to utilize helicopters and pilots who have high altitude experience in the mountains. This is not the time to try this out with somebody who's never done it before. And I don't know anything about the pilot or how they ended up crashing. I'm not going to speculate on that, but it goes to show you that it is very dangerous.
So Mitch, what I want to do here is just like tick through the lessons learned, and we'll keep these as concise as possible because I really do think that this is what's going to be helpful for people listening to the podcast, especially for, team sergeants, team leaders, company commanders, and interagency folks who deal with SOF overseas. The first lesson learned that we've highlighted is embassy focus, and this is actually a two-part lesson to learn. The first is for special operations forces in country. You should not expect that the embassy's leadership is going to be postured to think about how they can be expeditionary to go solve problems outside of the embassy, because their primary function is as representatives of America and in reporting back to Foggy Bottom or the Pentagon what the facts are on the ground. The second part of that lesson learned is for the interagency, for the foreign service officers, the ambassadors who find themselves in a country that's going through a process similar to this. And that is, if you have special operations on the ground, although they're not under chief of mission authority, I can almost assure you that they want to help, and they will have the training, the equipment, and the inclination to do incredible things that you don't even realize, because that's what we have American sons and daughters training to do daily all around the world in over, I think, 70 or 80 countries.
That's what we train to do. We train to be the ultimate problem solvers in resource-constrained environments, right?
Right.
Yeah. We're selected and trained for that end. Why not use us to it? Yeah.
The second point, and you're hitting on it, Mitch, is when you navigate through dynamic problems, what makes Special Forces A teams different from a lot of other military units is the ability to select young men and now women to make decisions by themselves in foreign countries. And if you don't have that maturity, or if you have one person on your team who doesn't have the maturity to operate on their own, the entire team, there's liability there. The entire team can't function if there's one person on the team that doesn't have the trust of the leadership and the ability to make mature decisions and be innovative problem solvers. We were really fortunate with our team that every single person on the ground, Mitch and I trusted to send off by themselves, potentially overnight in an austere environment, and make decisions on behalf of the U.S. government. The third lesson for especially team leadership is being in charge and persisting despite bureaucratic barriers. Mitch had mentioned that we had the conversation more than once that no one would fault us if we just didn't do anything. And when you're talking about putting your team's lives on the line to go do what they did, there's a lot of responsibility that you take on as a team leader, team sergeant, team warrant, and even the individuals themselves who went out on these rescue missions. We were in charge, and we weren't going to ask permission to go do the good things that we knew needed to be done. But we also knew that we would be faulted if something happened, likely that resulted in the loss of life. And so being able to kind of take a pause and say, we're putting people in a position with families who might not come back, but we know this is a good thing for the country and for the people that they're going to go rescue. That is why people become Green Berets. The fourth point, just really briefly, and this was a big part of like the Colonel Rates and the Shane Shorter story, you have to prepare for contingencies on all missions. I mentioned during our prep session that I had purchased a copy of The Only Thing Worth Dying For the entire team, because it told the story of an ODA who was doing a JSET when 9/11 happened, and a team that was like not even thinking about Afghanistan or what that might look like, went through an abbreviated planning process and found themselves with Karzai, the CIA, essentially like driving as the only ODA in air power through the south of Afghanistan to Kandahar. Like, you never know when something's going to change, and you can't take it for granted that a JSET's not going to turn into something different, be it kinetic or otherwise.
Yep. Real quick, I know we talked about this prior, but it's also important if you're going on a JSET, you always pack like you go anywhere, so you can flex from that mission to anything. Which
Exactly right.
I think set you guys up for success, right? You had everything you needed for communications, but if you had to go to, say, a combat zone as well, you guys probably would have been just as well equipped.
Absolutely. Yep. There are two final points, and I'll let Mitch jump in. One is brutal honesty in reporting. When special operations units are overseas, be they JSETs or combat deployments, our reporting channel relies on team leadership to give brutal and honest assessment that is not connected to the political consequences of that assessment, because otherwise, what are you doing there? And so what the command elements at SOCPAC or 1-1, regardless of what they do with that, you owe it. And you can put stuff beneath the cut line if you need to, but you need to be very clear about what you're seeing and what the circumstances look like on the ground, because that is, like, first and foremost what your value proposition is for the Pentagon, SOCPAC, SOCOM, and the State Department. The final piece is something we referenced earlier. When a crisis happens, there is a time clock that starts. There's a shrinking amount of time in which you can be effective before conventional force officers come to the ground, or before somebody back at the higher headquarters finally reads the sit reps that you've been sending and says, hey, this isn't something that we've approved. And so in that gray zone, in that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days is where you can do some amazing things. You have to be methodical and thoughtful about what you do, but that is where you can really make some things happen. One thing that I saw in going through my notes on this was a lot of the reporting was that we had been tasked to go do rescue operations. And if you look at the timeline, you'll start to see that we were doing that long before anybody even knew what we were doing. And so it was a bit disingenuous, but I think it probably saved us behind the scenes. But, this was something that the team agreed was an important thing to do. And the team leadership came together with a good plan that ultimately ended up bringing 55 people back home and one unfortunate casualty.
Yeah, we saved lives, bottom line. My message, the only message I want to throw out there as a takeaway, Dan crushed it. Mine is the up and out, the GCC and high level, so geographic combatant commander kind of level, operational strategic level for special forces and SOCOM. I would ask the leadership that exists now to sit down and have a discussion. I know these have happened before, but I would love for you to quantify, to put fiscal authority and permissions towards this end, so that when SOF finds itself in one of these situations, there is already something on the books. They can be remissioned with very little hoopla. There's already money that can be sliced off digitally or whatever it takes, or somebody with a money bag that can fly and join them to help them get resources, and that there's already something in play that you say, hey, I'm getting ready to execute Operation Blow Up Fat Man's Mattress. And they'll be like, roger that. Do what you got to do. And they give you a thumbs up or thumb down. Now, a commander obviously can say thumbs down, but at least they will know what it is you're getting ready to do. And all of that backing of the government, of the Department of Defense, has you, so that people who want to get things done and want to free the oppressed when the clock is ticking, before it's just snacks and tarps, which after that it's whatever. I'm talking about people that need to be saved now. And the country that is responding, the host nation, is overwhelmed. Put something on the books so guys and girls can get remissioned to that end.
Legit. What else would you like to add, Dan? Is that pretty much your points right there? Besides, I know you said there was a portion that we didn't quite get in there.
It's fine. I think we hit the most salient points. One more thing, and I think it bears mentioning. Although the team did some incredible things in country, if I was to quantify the impact, the thing that really moved the needle was the hospitality and the compassion of the people in Nepal, who are dealing with not only their own terrible situations out in these far off remote locations, but also had the willingness to take care of foreign hikers and trekkers that were also in a desperate situation. And what little they had, they were able to share until rescue came. And I think that bears mentioning.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, the culture there is very selfless. Very cool.
Well, Both of you, Dan, Mitch, thank you very much for this interview. That was pretty badass.
Mitch, I forget how good you are at telling stories, man. It was like story time with Grandpa Elwood.
Yeah, you know me.
That was great.
Thanks for joining us today in Pineland Underground, the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and Schools official podcast.
Please tune in to our next episode. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
You can reach us at pinelandunderground@gmail.com. Check it out.